Well, welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce myself and welcome you to this presentation today. It's on Bugs Are Us, Healthy Living and Aging with Our Microbes. My name is Paula Morrison. I am a practice lead with Interior Health and Long-Term Care and Seniors Care, and I'm happy to be part of the Embrace Aging Organizing Committee. And I'd like to welcome Brett Finlay to our session. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Brett, and then I'll do a little land acknowledgement after we introduce you.
I'm Brett. I'm a professor of microbiology at UBC.
Nice. We'd like to respectfully acknowledge that UBC Okanagan is situated on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Silks Okanagan Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge that many of you are joining us today from many places near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. Welcome to the 12th Annual Okanagan Embrace Aging Month, and thank you for joining us today. Embrace Aging is co-hosted by Beem Credit Union, Interior Health, and the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention at UBC Okanagan. Embrace Aging Month was launched 12 years ago to celebrate and raise awareness about positive aging, and has once again organized a number of educational opportunities and events during the month of March. The sessions are designed for everyone, young and old alike, and focus on a variety of topics related to healthy aging and always to improve quality of life among seniors and their family caregivers. Our goal is to inspire everyone to embrace positive aging. Some housekeeping tips: closed captioning. To turn closed captioning off, you can select the hide caption button on the menu bar. Questions: if you can type questions or comments for the speaker into the chat, then during the presentation, questions will be read at the end of the presentation. And also, if you have feedback for this event, please complete the survey that will be emailed to you. Today's event is brought to you with support of Embrace Aging Month. And today's session is Bugs Are Us. Our speaker here with Dr. Brett Finlay. So I look forward to hearing your presentation, and I'll pass the mic to you, the virtual mic.
Thank you, Paula. Hello, everyone. What I want to do in the next 40 minutes or so is talk to you something you probably don't think about a lot, but I want to strongly emphasize I really think this has a lot to do with healthy aging, and that is the role of microbes in and on us and how they influence us. So as I said, I'm a professor of microbiology at UBC, and I've studied microbes forever. I spent most of my career studying Salmonella and E. coli. These things cause diarrhea, so I have a very perverse sense of humor. I jokingly say that, feces are our bread and butter, and that's why my little restriction for fecal content, hang in there with the fecal jokes. I'm sorry, but it's just the world I live in. Okay, with that said, let's dive into the world of microbes, and it's probably something you don't think about a lot. Hang on, let me get this next slide. But microbes actually were discovered an awful long time ago. There was a guy named Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. You may have heard of him. He sold linens for a trade, and he loved looking at linens. So he got really good at basically grinding magnifying glasses so we could look at these linens. And he got so good at it, he actually made the very first microscope. And he was an inquisitive guy. So what do you do if you build a microscope? You start looking at things, right? So he looked inside puddles and drops of water and things. So one of the things he did is he scraped out his mouth and held it up to the light. And lo and behold, he saw all these little wiggly things. He called them animalcules, which were microbes, bacteria. And he made the stunning observations on the slide that there was more of these animalcules in his mouth than all the people living in the Netherlands, which is where he lived. And this was radical. The concept you have all of these little creepy little things living on you. Ooh, what's this about? No one believed him, of course. But over the years, as people saw more and more, they realized, yes, there were microbes in and on us. And that was basically when microbes were discovered way back in the late 1600s. They had no clue what these things did. And what we now realize is microbes, just because you can't see them, they're everywhere. So this is what we call the tree of life. This is basically all the forms of life. And the stuff that we see all the time, plants and animals and things like that, are just two little branches of the entire tree of life. Vast majority of it are microbes. And microbes built this world. They basically made the oxygen in the air that you're breathing now, and we evolved from them. That's where, and basically they became more complex, and that's when then we got the ones you can see, for example. But there's microbes everywhere in this world. Okay, let's continue our little history lesson here, and let's fast forward to the late 1800s. There's these two people here, Robert Koch and Louis Pasteur. These are both microbiologists, one Frenchman, one German. They hated each other. They were competitors. They were competing each other. But what these two people did in their labs is they showed microbes cause disease, infectious disease. Up until then, nobody had a clue what caused cholera. They thought it was bad air and swamp gas, and they had all these other crazy theories. But these two people showed that microbes cause disease. And then Louis Pasteur took it a step further. He said, well, if they cause disease, if we kill them, we shouldn't get disease, right? And so he did that experiment, and he was right. So that's where the word pasteurization comes from, when you kill the microbes, basically, so that you can't cause disease. Okay, well, once we realized that microbes are there and they cause disease, what do we want to do? Well, let's get rid of microbes, right? Because we will then start to get rid of diseases. And so humanity went on this century-long campaign for hygiene to clean up our world and get rid of microbes. And for example, in 1966, someone invented hand sanitizer. Kills 99.9% of bacteria. This is wonderful stuff, right? It's antibacterial. This is great. And as we know during the COVID outbreak, this stuff comes in handy sometimes when you're fighting infections. And as you go into every elder care center, there's always a hand wash station at the front. There's a reason for that. It kills microbes. But problem is, well, first of all, it worked. It worked great. We got rid of infectious diseases. Here's a graph of 50 years of humanity and several infectious diseases that were common that have now really, really decreased. We don't see these things very much anymore. And we got antibiotics, we got vaccines, we basically got hygiene. We basically know how to control many of these infectious diseases. And we've gotten really good at that. So the other half of the curve is what really I think interests me and will interest you in this talk, is basically all the other diseases we now see in society are not technically microbial diseases. Type 1 diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, asthma, these types of things, they're all going up at exactly the inverse proportion rate that microbes have gone down. And this has led to something we call the hygiene hypothesis, that our quest to get rid of microbes, we've cleaned up this world too much. And as we got rid of all the bad bugs, we're also getting rid of all the good ones we didn't realize they were good. And they're actually contributing to this problem in many of the diseases that we see in our modern day society. And so my goal in the next while is going to be convince you of this. And then also knowing this, well, what can you do about it to maybe enhance your healthy aging? That's where we're headed. So there's as many bacteria in and on you as there are human cells. So 1 to 1, you're as microbial as you are human, even though these microbes are quite a bit smaller than the human cells. But there's 100 times more bacterial genes in and on you than there are human genes, Homo sapien genes in and on you. So really, when I say, what is a human, it's basically the Homo sapiens plus an equal number of all these microbes living all over us. And this is kind of a radical concept. We call it a superorganism kind of thing. But I think this is something we're starting to realize, that, our human-centric view of things is, no, we're actually basically a vessel for all these microbes as we walk around and eat and drink. We're not just feeding them, we're feeding the microbes. So where are these microbes? They're basically everywhere in the body that faces the outside. So first of all, skin, of course. And the microbes on your right hand are different than the microbes on your left hand, because one hand holds a pen, the other the cell phone. You do different things kind of thing, but they're there. But microbes are just like any life form. They like moisture. So the moist areas of the skin, the armpits and the groin, there's a lot more microbes there than there are, say, on your forearms, which is quite dry. There's some in the nasal and oral cavities. So basically every time you breathe in, there's microbes there. But then as you go down the gastrointestinal tract, which is really basically a tube that goes from the mouth to the anus right through us. So it's technically not in us. It's basically a tube running through us. They get more and more and more as you go down. And in the large bowel, there's an incredible number of microbes we'll talk about in a second. There's also microbes in the urogenital tract, especially the women's vaginal tract. They play a big role in there. And so they're all over us. So really, it's a numbers game. And here's the number 10 to the 13th. What does that mean? It's a big number, trust me. This is basically the number of microbes we think are on us. And to put things in perspective, if you take 1 gram of feces, which is about the size of your little finger, in that little gram of feces, there are more microbes than there are people living on this entire planet. So I jokingly say, think of the genocide you commit every time you flush the toilet kind of thing. There's lots and lots of microbes in and on us. And that's normal. We can't see them, but that's part of us. We've evolved with them, and that's just how we are. So like one night I was bored, so I did what I call a Bill Nye the Science Guy experiment. I brushed my teeth, and I took a swab out of my mouth, and I gram stained it. So that's what that picture on the left is. And that's one cell from my mouth. Gorgeous, sexy cell, great nucleus, right? Looks really pretty. And see all those little dots on there? Many of them are dimers, little twos together. Those are all the microbes. They're just in my mouth after I brush my teeth. Again, that's normal. They're there. That's just what you see. And the picture on the right is a colorized version of some of the microbes in different shapes and sizes, and what they kind of look like. So where do you get your microbes, and how do they behave over your lifetime? Well, it's thought the fetus inside the mother is generally sterile. So that's a sterile environment. That means there's no microbes there. The second you were born, bam, that's when you encounter microbes. And then if you witness birth, it's a very gross event there. And basically these babies are exposed to a massive dose of vaginal fecal microbes. Gross as heck, but really important. That is when you first get colonized by your microbes. And if you're born, say, for example, by C-section, you don't experience this, that actually screws up your microbes and you have problems later in life. So I jokingly say that that first big gulp is the best birthday present you will ever get from your mother, because that starts your microbes. Then those of you who had babies know that, that for the first while, the feces is actually pretty sweet smelling, because there's lactose from the sugars and the milk in there kind of thing. And then if you've ever gone from breastfed or bottle fed to solid food, you know exactly what happens at the other end. Feces stink, it goes dark, it goes awful, it's horrible, messy stuff. That's because you've changed the microbes, because you've changed your diet, and these microbes then change. And then toddlers, they bounce around a bit, but they're pretty stable. And generally, when you become an adult, your microbes are pretty much constant your entire life until you turn 65, unless you do something drastic. By drastic, I mean move to another country, you become a vegetarian after being a meat eater, you have massive doses of antibiotics. If you don't do any of those things, generally your microbes are pretty constant. They're unique to you. No other person in the world has the same microbes as you. There's no one conserved microbe throughout the world, but that's just you based on your life experiences. And then pertinent to this talk is that once you turn 65, your microbes fall off a cliff. They get really weird and really strange. And I'm going to try and convince you that actually plays a role in aging. And if we can prevent that falling off a cliff, we can actually enhance healthy aging. So take a look at a list of diseases on the left. These are diseases that are common in our society. And basically, none of these are what we would call an infectious disease, like cholera or tuberculosis or measles or anything like this. These are all kind of sort of autoimmune diseases, but very common in our society. Now, a few years ago, when we acquired the ability to ask what microbes were in people, we found that people with these diseases had different microbes than people that didn't have these diseases. We called that dysbiotic. It means basically they're screwed up, the equilibrium's mixed up. That doesn't mean they're causing this disease, but we know there's a correlation. If you have a disease, you have different microbes. Now, okay, if microbes are involved in health and disease, can we use them actually to prevent disease? And this is where the concept of fecal transfers come in. And a fecal transfer is exactly as it sounds. You take feces from a healthy person and then basically either put it in orally through a tube or anally through a gavage, and you basically put this feces into a diseased person. Now, this was shown to work in a disease caused by Clostridium difficile, or C. diff. You've probably heard of this. This is a disease it's been a big problem in Ontario and Quebec and healthcare centers. And the way it works is that, let's pretend you're going for surgery, you need a hip transplant or some other surgery. The doctor is going to fill you up with antibiotics, so they don't want to get infections at the surgery site. The problem is the antibiotics kill the good bugs and the bad. And then C. difficile then takes advantage of this opportunity. It then jumps in, and then it causes disease. And this could be a life-threatening disease, and several people have died in it. And ironically, this is actually a disease caused by antibiotics. I should add this slide is taken from a This Hour's 22-minute skit on fecal transfers. If you ever want to see something very funny, I suggest you look it up on YouTube. So I've never tried calling the actual number, but anyway. So I personally got to experience this fun little journey. I needed minor bowel surgery. The surgeon said, well, we're going to give you antibiotics before surgery. So I don't want them because that's just going to cause C. diff. You'll never get C. diff. Don't worry about it, right? And so I had the surgery. I took the antibiotics. Surgery was fine. 2 weeks later, I developed severe fever and severe diarrhea, and I knew I had C. diff. I sterilized a glass jar, took a fecal sample, walked into the hospital. They tested it. It came in screaming hot C. diff. Okay, well, this was caused by the antibiotics. How do we treat this? So they gave me a standard antibiotic called vancomycin, and it has about a 25% cure rate. I took it. 2 weeks later, bam, same thing happened again. So I did the same thing. I took in a sterile jar and put some feces in it and said, tested, I'm sure I got C. diff. Lo and behold, I did. Now I've had C. diff twice. Well, what do we do now? Well, they said, well, there's very expensive, I think it was $5,000 antibiotic that supposedly cures more of this than vancomycin. Do you want to try that? And basically, so they put me on that. Luckily, healthcare covered it. And in the meantime, I'd already called up a colleague of mine who I knew was doing fecal transfers at VGH, and he had a little tube in the freezer with my name on it. And the rule was that if you had a third course of C. diff, you have what's called recurrent C. difficile, then you're eligible for a fecal transfer. So I had a tube all lined up and everything, and I was ready to go. But unfortunately, the antibiotic worked. I didn't get C. diff a third time, so I didn't get a fecal transfer, so I can't complete the story the way I wanted to. So anyway, that's my story. So it's personal, but it works. This is how it works. Okay, let's switch from microbes to healthy aging. So what we've come to learn is that the environment plays a massive role in how you age. It's thought that about 25% of your aging process is defined by genetics. You have a gene that is going to, I don't know, give you breast cancer or something like that. But the vast majority, 75% of it, is due to your environmental exposures and what you do in this world. That means you can control 75% of your aging. That's huge. Most people say, oh, my mother had cancer, therefore I'm going to get cancer or something. No, the environment plays a big role many times in this. And the way I look at the world is basically microbes are a filter between us and the outside world. It's kind of like sort of polarized sunglasses. Everything you touch, eat, breathe, that's all filtered by the microbes because there's this whole veneer surface of microbes all over us. So they're filtering what comes from the environment into us. And when you eat, for example, it's microbes are breaking down your food and making these molecules that then go into you. So in terms of aging, when do you think you're the absolute at your prime? Now, I was sort of thinking, I don't know, early 20s kind of thing. No, age 12. If you could stay at age 12, it's predicted you'd live about 1,000 years. That's when you're at prime. And then every 8 years after that, you double your chance of dying. So those of you that get long in the tooth, think how many times you've doubled your chance of dying over this last while. Basically, the biggest risk for dying is getting old. Every 8 years you survive, you've just doubled your chance of dying. So here's a rather morbid slide. These are the top 10 reasons why Canadians die. And look through this list. And these are all the ones you know and expect and things. There's nothing really unusual there. But how many of these are microbial? Well, if you look down at number 8, influenza and pneumonia, that's the only really infectious disease on here that's in the top 10 reasons dying. All the others, heart disease, cancer, lung, Alzheimer's type things. These are thought not to be infectious agents. Yet what we're realizing is that all but accidents on the list actually have a strong microbial link to the actual disease occurrence. Accidents can't see officer, the microbes made me do it. It's just an accident kind of thing. But and all these others, there's actually microbial links to these types of things. And so I'm just going to give you a couple examples of trying to convince you that, wow, I never knew microbes could do this. So driving this whole thing is basically what we call inflammation. Now, you probably know that inflammation is what you have when you say fight off, you get an infected cut in your hand or something like that. It's good for fighting off infection. But the problem is too much inflammation causes tissue damage, and that's not good. So what happens as you get old, two things happen. Your microbes get we get more dysbiotic, we get more inflammatory. Different kinds of microbes come in that trigger inflammation more in the body. And the second thing that happens is your gut gets more permeable. So what happens is these inflammatory microbes seep into the body, they trigger low-grade inflammation. That then causes tissue damage, and that then is a key problem for many of the diseases that are associated with aging. And they call this inflammaging. So basically, the bottom line is as you grow older, your inflammation increases. This causes tissue damage, which then is a bit central part of many of the diseases we're actually talking about. And well, can we do something about it? Well, in mice, if you do a fecal transfer from an old mouse into a young mouse, so the old microbes go into the young mouse, you then trigger much more inflammation, and then that mouse does not live as long. You can do it the other way too, which is really cool. If you take a young mouse, put its feces into an old mouse, it has less inflammation and it lives longer. It hasn't been done to people yet. I jokingly tell my students, hey, can I borrow some feces? You know, maybe I'll live a little longer, but it's never been done. So I can't say in people, but there's real hints that this is what's driving this whole aging process. If we can slow that down, we can actually enhance healthy aging. Okay, so let's take, I think it was number 1 and 3 in that list, heart attacks and strokes. And that's all caused by cardiovascular disease. So if you have a clot, basically in the heart, you have a heart attack. In the brain, it cuts off the brain blood, that's a stroke. And everyone knows that's caused by high cholesterol, right? We already know that, and blood pressure and things like this. Well, it turns out that actually, no, there's actually, so when you eat, so big risk for cardiovascular disease are red meat, for example. When you eat red meat, what happens is microbes break down pieces of the red meat, a molecule called phosphocholine, into another molecule. Your liver oxidizes that in something called TMAO, and that's actually a much better predictor of cardiovascular disease than cholesterol. If you take mice that have no microbes in them, you can feed them as much red meat as you want. They can't break that down. They never make this molecule. They don't get cardiovascular disease, period. We know that vegans and vegetarians that don't eat red meat, they have much lower rates of heart attacks and strokes. And they actually did a crazy experiment when they took a vegetarian that never eaten meat in their life, and they fed him a steak. For the good of science, I guess this person agreed to do that. What happened? Well, nothing, right? Because this person has never had meat. They never had the microbes that break down meat. And in mice, so far anyway, if you make inhibitors of those microbial enzymes that do that first breakdown step, so you can't break the meat down the same way, you basically block cardiovascular disease. So where we're headed with this is, oh, I want to go to the keg tonight for a steak. You know, maybe in theory you could take a pill that's got the inhibitors for these microbial enzymes so you don't increase the problems of this molecule. So it's really exciting. But again, who'd have thought that cardiovascular disease was microbial related? A fascinating area, but we don't know a lot about it yet, in this whole microbe world is what we call the gut-brain axis. We know the brain influences the gut. It controls the motility and things like this. And, gut feelings, for example, and things like this. But what we're now realizing is it also works the other way. Microbes talk to the brain. And that's where it gets really exciting. And like I say, it's a new area, but we don't have a lot of details yet, but it's really neat. So for example, if you take animals that are born sterilely by C-section and fed sterile food and water, these are what we call germ-free. So they don't have any microbes in them. If you take feces from a person or a healthy mouse or rat that's stressed, anxious, or depressed, do a fecal transfer into a normal mouse, you basically transfer stress, anxiety, and depression just by taking this feces over. So that's a big indicator that there's something that feces, and it's probably microbes, that is actually translating this, causing this stress, anxiety, and depression. There was a major study in the UK. We looked people that were constantly using antibiotics, and what they found is that basically antibiotic use really increases anxiety and depression and stress. And we know what antibiotics do. They kill microbes, right? Antivirals didn't have an effect, nor did antifungals, but antibacterial antibiotics had this effect. So there's all sorts of things popping up. I'm not going to go into all of them, that these microbes play a big role in affecting the brain. So I think it was number 4 on this list is a horrible disease called Alzheimer's disease. And this is a mental disease where you basically lose your ability to remember and talk and things like this. And This disease is what we call a westernized disease in urban modern societies. This is just going up like all those other diseases I showed you at the beginning of the talk. Ironically, it's thought that the least amount of Alzheimer's incidence is in rural India. What's in rural India? A heck of a lot of microbes. They die of diarrhea there still, and then basically they are, if I can say, undeveloped in that sense, but they have the lowest rates of Alzheimer's because they're not following the Western diet and the whole Western lifestyle. So here's a fun tidbit. If you remember anything from this talk, brush your teeth. It was a really interesting twin study where basically they were brushing their teeth. One twin did and the other didn't. They had poor oral hygiene. Basically, they really dropped the rate of Alzheimer's disease. So you're saying, what does brushing teeth have to do with Alzheimer's? Well, it turns out this gets us back to the whole inflammation story, that if you have poor oral health, your gums are kind of yucky and microbes are hanging out in there. They can then seep through your diseased gums into your body. They then trigger inflammation. Inflammation causes tissue damage, which we then believe plays a major role in the acquisition of Alzheimer's disease. So brush your teeth. This has also been shown in mice, in most models of Alzheimer's, basically mice that lack microbes or have a lot less microbes, they basically don't get Alzheimer's disease, or at least the mouse equivalent of Alzheimer's disease and things. So if microbes are involved in this, what can we do about it? Well, here's a really, I think, interesting way of really decreasing the risk of Alzheimer's. It's something called the MIND diet. The MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean diet, which you probably all know about, healthy eating, and then something called the DASH diet that was developed for cardiovascular disease. And really, this is a diet that eating the stuff you know you should eat and avoiding the stuff that your mother said you shouldn't eat kind of thing, but you do anyway because it's good. So the MIND diet is, it's basically fruits, nuts, vegetables. You can see the list there, a glass of wine a day, lots of beans, berries, fish, poultry, olive oil, all that good stuff. And don't eat red meat, butter, fried foods, cheese, pastries, white sugar, white flour, all the stuff that we love to eat. So this study came out, and there's now been 2 more since then that show exactly the same thing. If you follow this MIND diet, you drop your risk of Alzheimer's by over 50%. That's incredible. That's by far the best thing you can do right now in terms of Alzheimer's. And even if well, once in a while, I'm not so perfect. I do like a donut once in a while or whatever. You can follow, but you follow mostly, you can drop it by over 35%. So again, here's something proactive you can do. And we all know that diet works through microbes and things. We'll get into that. But anyway, keep that in mind. Follow the MIND diet. It's an amazing thing. The other big degenerative brain disease we see in the elderly is Parkinson's disease. So you're stooped over, you have tremors kind of thing. And everyone always thought this is a brain disease because the brain controls the movements and things. Well, it turns out in Scandinavia, they were doing these crazy experiments with people had ulcers. So they were cutting the nerve that goes from the gut to the brain, something called the vagus nerve, from the brain to the gut, because that decreased the pain. What they found, and I have no idea why they looked at this, they found that people that had that nerve cut had way less rates of Parkinson's disease. So what does cutting the nerve that hooks the brain to the gut have to do with Parkinson's disease? Well, humor me. It turns out that the biggest risk factor for Parkinson's disease is being constipated 30 years before you see Parkinson's. The second biggest risk factor is eating red meat. And so the way we think Parkinson's now, we think a lot of it actually starts in the gut. And what happens, you eat red meat, you're constipated, you have a dysbiotic microbes, and there's a protein that's involved in Parkinson's called alpha-synuclein. It's also in the gut. It then gets misfolded, and then it works its way up that nerve, the vagus nerve, up into the brain, some place called the substantia nigra. That area of the brain is the place that produces the dopamine that controls the tremors. That area of the brain gets destroyed because of this misfolded protein, and then we see it as the brain disease. So, and really, this is how we now think Parkinson's actually works. And we started with several years ago, we started studying this, and we can now predict with about 80% accuracy whether you have Parkinson's or not just by sampling your feces. There's many microbes that are very characteristic of being Parkinson's. Again, they're dysbiotic or abnormal compared to normal people, compared to the spouses, for example. And so we could identify some were good bugs, some were bad bugs. If you had the good bugs, they basically made these things called short-chain fatty acids that dampen inflammation, because remember, inflammation is bad in this case. And the bad bugs basically promoted it, and they were causing problems with this, as well as causing constipation. So again, microbes, what can we do about it? Well, this is an interesting story that, remember we had COVID, basically we were told overnight we had to shut the lab. And we had to, unfortunately, kill all our mice and everything, and we were just stuck at home in front of our computers. And one of my graduates, he's really good at bioinformatics. He said, I need something to do. I'm getting bored. What can we do? So we basically said, well, the mind diet has been shown to basically really decrease Alzheimer's. Does it decrease Parkinson's as well? So we had all the data from our clinical cohort. We went through all that and said, what are these people eating? I'm skip to the chase. Bottom line is, if you follow the mind diet, your onset of Parkinson's is delayed by about 17 years in women and about 10 years in men, just by what you're eating. And that's huge, because Parkinson's doesn't usually kick in until 65 or so. You had 17 years from that. You're going to die of something else first. So again, it was just like the Alzheimer's story that basically, and we now know, we've done the studies and stuff to show that this diet is influencing the microbes that are influencing the outcome of this disease. So again, if you remember anything from the seminar, eat healthy, because it's going to have a profound effect on brain diseases. The other problem with aging is you lose your muscles and you lose your bones. This is just a normal function of aging. It's called frailty. So the loss of muscles is something called sarcopenia, and the loss of bones is osteoporosis. And I'm sure you all know that. I hope you're all exercising and stuff and doing your weight-bearing exercises for the bones kind of thing. Well, what do microbes have to do with this? It's still early days, but we're finding all sorts of fascinating things. And microbes affect calcium absorption, which affects your bone strength and triggers that. And they also affect hormonal aspects, which also affects your bones, for example. And then again, in muscle strength, there's early links to microbes that are looking quite promising, basically, that as you eat healthy and stuff, you decrease your rates of sarcopenia, your loss of muscles, because this is all linked to all microbes. So again, people tell you to exercise regularly. Exercise has wonderful benefits for the microbes as well as you. You basically promote the anti-inflammatory ones, which also contribute to your general health. I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of microbes in the women's vagina. This plays a major role in normal vaginal health. It turns out that the normal vaginal microbes are there for a reason. They protect you. You have a very acidic area there, and they basically hang out and they keep the bad bugs from crawling in. And any woman who has taken antibiotics gets a secondary urinary tract infection. That's because the antibiotics kill the healthy microbes in the vagina, and bad ones crawl in, and that causes the problem. Now, as you know, also in menopause, there's changes in hormones and things. There's a decrease in estrogen, and there's all sorts of amazing things coming out of what microbes do with estrogen, and can we actually hijack this to actually enhance menopausal health. And they're even trying to put estrogen, make a probiotic lactobacillus to produce estrogen to do this. And microbes have a big influence on metabolizing estrogen. Vegans and vegetarians, actually, their microbes don't metabolize estrogen as much, so they actually seem to do better in menopause because of this, or supposedly because of this. So we don't have all the details yet, but it's a fascinating area. I think that it's going to come. Another quick aside is I just read a paper a couple of days ago where they're actually doing vaginal microbial transfers for people that have recurrent urinary tract infections. Try and put, and it worked beautifully, actually. And they're putting healthy microbes back in to then actually cause this major problem that's tough to treat. Cancer, that was another one on the list. There's actually 10 microbes that actually cause cancer. 9 of them are basically viruses, we call them oncoviruses, they trigger. And there's one bacteria, something called Helicobacter pylori, which causes stomach cancers. So I don't want to get into that too much, but in cancer, there's been a huge breakthrough in the last few years in treating tough to treat cancers, such as small lung cell carcinomas and malignant melanomas. And this is something called checkpoint inhibitor therapy. And basically what they do is they make things that come in and remove a checkpoint on the immune system. So you remove this inhibitor, the immune system goes crazy, and it actually then goes after the tumor and kills it. So you're unleashing your own immune system on tumors. And this has been spectacular in these diseases, but it only works in some people. And the question is, how come? Well, we now know that it's whatever microbes you have or don't have, and it basically seems to work through these microbes. And basically now realizing that what there's many companies now working towards, can we actually, if you don't have these microbes, but unfortunately have this cancer, can we give you these good microbes so the therapy will now work and you can then treat it? So that's what the world is working hard towards now. So stay tuned. COVID. The greatest experiment ever, as far as I'm concerned. When else can you shut down the entire world and see what happens? I mean, we all know how this disruptive was, especially for elder care, and had huge effects. We used hand sanitizer. We wouldn't talk to anyone. We coughed in here, and basically we went from up until then, we're saying, yes, you should embrace your microbes. It's good for you. Suddenly, said, no, 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 don't go near microbes. You could get sick or whatever. We went on this massive hygiene kick kind of thing. And it's the hygiene hangover all over again. Well, microbes actually play a big role in COVID. And there's some really neat studies that have now come out that basically you can predict who's going to get long COVID or not based on the microbes you have. And it's very accurate. These microbes seem to sum up. Now, long COVID is enhanced inflammation and things, so maybe they're working through there. You can also predict the severity of the COVID you're going to get based on the microbes you had, again, probably related to the immune response. And on a really hopeful note, there was a fabulous study that came out of Hong Kong last year where they used a combination of 1 prebiotic and 3 probiotics. We'll talk about that in a bit. And they called a symbiotic. This thing had a wonderful effect in decreasing the incidence of long COVID. So basically, they gave everyone that had COVID this mixture, and if you got the mixture, you didn't get long COVID. It was just absolutely stunning results. So microbes actually do have big roles to play in COVID. The other interesting thing about COVID is that from the kids' point of view, we were thinking, oh my goodness, these kids are living in sterile places. They can't go to the playground. They can't interact with their kids. They're living in isolation and stuff. This must be horrible for them. Well, it turns out we actually got it wrong. It was actually good for kids because they were spending so much time with their mother. They were breastfed and they weren't going to daycare, which gives you all these infections when you're young. So it actually got that wrong. They actually did pretty good in terms of the microbial exposure. Social exposure sucks, and we all know about the issues with COVID kids, for example. But from a microbial point of view, actually spending more time with your mother breastfeeding things was actually good for them. Okay, I've talked a lot about various diets and things. Here's an interesting concept that you have unique microbes. So maybe we should think about a personalized diet that's tailored to the microbes that you have. And there was a company called Day 2 that was formed to basically do that. They analyzed the microbes, and based on that, they would suggest foods that would decrease glucose spikes, which decreases insulin resistance and diabetes and obesity type thing. And so this actually company was around for several years. It was doing great. It worked great. It was very good. And I actually took the tests, and it's kind of fun. It said, okay, let's have a whole wheat bagel that scores me, I don't know, 5 out of 10, for example. I said, well, let's have a glass of single malt whiskey with it, see what that does. And ironically, that was supposed to be good for me. I mean, I didn't do the real experiment, but anyway. But so Day 2 was going along great, but then Ozempic came along. And it basically, Day 2 just went out of business recently because Ozempic has basically displaced it. But it's a really neat concept that you can actually tailor your diet based on the microbes you have to actually, control weight and things. The other thing to thinking about diet and stuff is avoid what we call yo-yo diets. Every Christmas, holiday season, I gain a couple extra pounds, all the shortbread cookies and stuff, your weight goes up a bit. And then New Year's resolution, go on a diet, drop a little bit, and you creep upwards again, and then you do it again, again, and again. And over the years, things keep going up. Turns out this is actually not a good thing to do. Do not do this, at least in mice, because what happens when you go on a diet, you're basically entering starvation mode, and you enrich for microbes that are really good at getting calories out of food. And this is probably left over from the days when we were starving most of the time in cavemen and things like this, where we didn't get much food. And so these starvation bugs are really good at putting on weight. So you go on a diet, you select for these starvation bugs, then you go back to normal eating. Yahoo, look at all these calories coming in, and then you gain some more weight. In the mouse studies, they showed, if translated to a human, that if you go on a diet, you should not go on another diet for 5 years, because otherwise you will enrich for these things, you won't get rid of them. So if you're going to go on a diet, stick with it, guys, because you do not want to go on and off diets. That is not good for you, and that's kind of what leads to that progressive weight gain over time. Okay, I promised to talk about probiotics. These are defined as basically live microbes that you take that have a defined health benefit. These things are not taken as medicines. You can't, and there's no FDA or Health Canada approval to say that these basically will cure a disease. So because they're not regulated by Health Canada or the FDA, they have a very much, so I would say, lower stringency for proof of actually doing something. So there are some probiotics that work for some things. And I'm not going to go through them all, but I think if you're interested in probiotics, Google probiotic chart or go to that website, have a listed probioticchart.ca. This lists all the probiotics that you get in Canada, what they are, how many microbes there are, things. But importantly, it lists what's the scientific evidence for it actually working in double-blind placebo-controlled trials, which is our standard for medicine. And some work for antibiotic-associated diarrhea and stuff, and some other infant things. But it's kind of like, okay, I need a new pair of running shoes. You go into a running store, and there's a whole wall full of shoes. There's hikers and tennis shoes and basketball shoes and whatever shoes. You don't just buy the cheapest one. You actually got a very specific one. And that's, I think, the problem with probiotics is people just buy these things not knowing this. All that said, there's a whole new generation of probiotics coming. The problem with most current probiotics is like lactobacillus is a vaginal microbe. It's acidic, there's air there. You're then taking 10 billion of these things, you're putting it into your gut, which there's no air, and it's basic. Basically, it doesn't survive, it dies. And so that's why you have to take probiotics every day, is because they don't survive, they don't set up a colony, they go right through you. It's a great business model because you're selling probiotics, you have to take it every day. But that said, we're now getting to the stage where, okay, let's take these 8 microbes from the gut. We know that these things work together to do this biochemical action. And then let's put it in, it'll colonize, and then it'll work. And that's where it's going now. It calls these live biotherapeutic products. And there's now commercial things that are in phase 3 for example, C. difficile and other things. So these are coming, and they're going through the FDA and Health Canada as drugs. So I think in the future, it's great, but currently the probiotic field is not so good. I mentioned that thing in Hong Kong that also contained a prebiotic. Prebiotics are basically just microbial food. They're carbohydrates. So the idea is a prebiotic is you take the microbial food, and by that you will then feed the right microbes, and then it'll then flourish in you. There's very little good data on prebiotics right now that they do anything. I think you'll hear like things like inulin, for example. And then if the idea if you have a prebiotic, i.e. the starch, plus the microbe that breaks it down, the probiotic, that together is what we call a symbiotic. It's the two of them together. And again, there's very little data in that area that they actually work or not. Okay, so remember at the beginning I said the environment plays a major role in how we age. So I would like you to think about how you encounter your environment from a microbial point of view. And again, I strongly think that in general, we live way too clean. Yes, if there's an outbreak, you want to wash your hands and things, but play in the dirt, hug your grandkids, so what if the dirty diaper? That's actually good for you, kind of thing. Get those young microbes into you. So we have spent a major quest being germophiles. And oh my God, I'm going to get something. And COVID really accentuated this, but we just live too clean. We also spend all the time indoors. That's not how we evolved. When you look at how hominids evolved, we were out there walking across the savannah and things. We never spent any time indoors. And indoors, of course, is not good for microbes compared to outdoors. And we know that institutional care from a microbe point of view, this is terrible. You look at the diets in these elder care homes, it's often, crustless white bologna sandwiches, which is terrible for microbes, poor diets. And the other problem is you're hanging out with elder microbes. You're hanging out with all the old kids, with the old people with the old microbes kind of thing. And I personally think we should have kids and dogs racing through old folks' homes as much as possible. Let's get those young microbes in there because we actually need that. And we know that multi-generational homes are actually good for that. I'll say about that in a bit. The other problem is in elder care is we use antibiotics like water. There's tons and tons of antibiotics used for potential say vaginal infections, for example, urinary tract infections when it's not warranted, et cetera. And they're just way overused. And of course, you know what that does, that kills off good microbes. So I'm a real convert of get out there, enjoy the microbes, try and hang around. I mean, I've gone on a quest to have young friends because then I can steal their microbes, right? Maybe that's going to help. Play with your grandkids, keep the windows open, have a plant, embrace the microbes because that's actually good for you. Interesting fact about cell phones, we're all on them, for example. Most people check their cell phone on average 47 times a day. There's 10 times more microbes on that cell phone than there's in a toilet seat. So, and of course, it's going to be an indication of the microbes that are on your hand. Okay, let's kind of wrap up the list of what are we trying to say here? So there's a guy named Dan Buettner who identified what called the blue zones. These are 5 areas in the world, you can see in the top right corner, where people live forever. They live just a really long time. 100+ years is quite common kind of thing. And so where are they? Well, they're in Okinawa, Japan. There are 2 in the Mediterranean, 1 in Costa Rica, 1 in Loma, California. And so when this came out and stuff, I put on my microbiologist lens to why are these people living so long from a microbial point of view? Well, there's 4 reasons in this slide, and I'm going to add a 5th, and I'm just going to tell you about that I didn't put in this slide. First of all, diet. Okinawa, Japan, that's fish and rice and healthy things like that. Mediterranean, well, I've already preached again and again and again how important the Mediterranean diet is. They follow the Mediterranean diet. Costa Rica, that's beans and rice kind of thing. It's a pig roast maybe once a year. None of these places eat lots of red meat. But if you're thinking, well, Loma Linda, California, like home of the Big Mac, what's going on there? Well, it turns out that Loma Linda, California has many Seventh-day Adventists, and by religion, they're vegetarians, so they don't eat a lot of red meat. Exercise, diet and exercise. If you ask me what you should do tomorrow, diet and exercise. These are the biggest things that influence your microbes. Not only is exercise good for your heart, it's good for your microbes. As I said, it basically shifts the microbes to beneficial anti-inflammatory microbes that actually then dampen the inflammation of the body and enhance it. And there's study after study after study showing exercise is good. Not as many shown that's due to the microbes, but I think that's to come. And so I think that, it's not just good for your heart, it's good for your microbes as well. Another thing to consider is the community you hang out. Who are your friends? Who are you hanging out with? And like in many of these places, they live in multi-generational homes where there's their 80-year-old daughters looking after the 100-year-old dad. And they got the grandkids and the dogs roaring through the house and everything. That's actually good from a microbe point of view. You can get these young microbes into the elder people, and that actually helps. And as I've said, I think we should rethink how we treat elder care places. There should be dogs and young kids and everything going through in that community. And study after study also showed that if you just sort of live by yourself in your little apartment, you never actually talk to anything, that's not good from a microbe point of view. Stress. Stress is the hardest thing I think we have to deal with in our society. We live in a very stressful society, and stress is horrible for your microbes. It drives them toward the inflammatory type microbes really quickly. And, again, Okinawa, Japan, cool, Mediterranean, they're chilled out, it's Mediterranean, Costa Rica kind of thing, in California, decreased stress. So stress is important. And the one I didn't add to the list that I should have is sleep. And this has only come in the last 5 years or so, that sleep is really important for health, especially brain health, Alzheimer's, dementia type thing, big issues there. And there's lots of correlation now with healthy diet, improving sleep, and decreasing sleep apnea and all these things. And lots of interesting connection with the microbes and sleep. And it's the same kind of story, basically. Healthy microbes makes better sleep is the bottom line of what we learned about that in the last few years. So what can we say? Well, I think I've tried to convince you that, when you think about healthy aging, my guess is 5 years ago, you weren't thinking about microbes. I really hope you are now, because I think this is it's a whole generation. The best thing is we can change our microbes. We can't change our genes, but we can affect our microbes, which means you can be proactive and do something about this. And so, I urge you as you're living your life to think about it from a microbial point of view. Definitely avoid unnecessary antibiotics. If you need antibiotics for serious infection, yes, take them for sure. But don't take them just because I might have an ear infection. It might be viral, it won't work anyway, but it can't hurt. That has to change. You want to decrease your antibiotic use. I've already lectured you on the unfortunate, problems associated with red meat and healthy, and how much beneficial healthy eating. Again and again, this comes up, that healthy diet makes healthy person type thing. Exercise, of course, stay active. You don't have to be a marathon runner. Just get active, get out there, walk around, keep the heart going and keep the microbes going. Avoid stress, brace your community, and get a good night's sleep. So I'm going to do a personal plug here. I've written 2 books. The first one, it's about how to raise your kids with their microbes. and I wrote it with Claire Arietta, for a postdoc of mine. And if you ever have to go to a baby shower, get them this as a present. It's a great baby shower present because basically it's I didn't talk much about it in this talk, but I can give a whole talk on how important microbes are both early in life and late in life. The two bookends of life, that's where the action is. So that's what Let Them Eat Dirt is. There's also a fun 1 hour documentary made on YouTube now called Let Them Eat Dirt, and basically says these kind of things. So if you have grandkids or whatever, get their parents to watch that, and I think it'll change how they interact with the kids. Let them get dirty. And then the other one I wrote with my daughter, Jessica, who's a gerontologist, University of Colorado, Boulder. And this is basically what we've talked about today. And we wrote this about 5 years ago. Don't buy this book. Wait for this one to come out. So basically, Jessica, I've now rewritten this whole book. I spent the last 2 years doing this, and it's all about all the things we talked about in this thing. It's coming out July 1st. We retitled it, thankfully. I hated the previous title. It's called The Microbiome Master Key. And we go through every part of the body and talk about all these things these microbes do, and much more detail we gave in this talk here. But when we first wrote the book, I wanted to write a book that said, well, based on the science, you can do this now to change your microbes. But the problem is the science wasn't there yet. We thought we could, but we didn't really know. Now we know. And what this book is basically full of helpful hints that take-home things that you can do to enhance your health based on basically enhancing your microbes to do this. So that brings me to the end. I hope I've tried to convince you microbes play a big role in aging, and you can do something about it too. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
What a fantastic presentation. I learned so much. I've got a lot of things spinning, but we got some really good questions. So I'm going to let our audience ask their questions. And one of them is, Brett, thanks a lot for a very informative presentation. Question about ADHD on the slide that was close to the mini diet one.
Yeah.
Can you comment on ADHD and microbes, please?
Yeah, I stayed away from that because we're talking about aging, but that's definitely kids. But no, there's big stuff with ADHD and autism. Their microbes seem to play a big role in that. They seem to play a role in how the brain develops, actually. In autism, there's some really small but very promising studies coming out on fecal transfers into autistic kids that really dampen, they don't cure it, but they really dampen the autistic things of it. So it's coming, as I said, stress and anxiety, you can transfer via the microbes. As for the details, they suck. We don't know scientifically what's going on yet, and what's causing. My wife is a pediatrician. She complains that when she went into the business 30 years ago, it was all infections. Now it's all developmental learning issues and ADHD and autism stuff. It's really become very prevalent in our society. And what I've learned is pretty much anytime diseases do that, that's linked to our changes in the microbes. So I'm guessing that's it, but we don't have data there.
Well, you must have some interesting conversations at the dinner table. Any idea why chicken is okay while red meat is problematic? Someone else asked.
Yeah, that has to do with, I mean, I looked this up too because I think it's a great question. First of all, what is red meat? So pork is actually considered red meat too, and it's basically the amount of hemoglobin that's in the tissues that makes it a red meat or not. But what that has to do with microbes, and is the microbes metabolizing this hemoglobin or not that causing it? We don't really know, and I don't have a good answer for that. We probed it, and I think it's a great question. But we do know that chicken and poultry and fish kind of thing, they're okay, and the red meats are not. And I do think it has a lot of part that has to do with the amount of this phosphocholine, which I said the microbes break down in Parkinson's kind of thing. That's very much that's more in the red meats than in the white meats. So maybe that's one of the reasons there. Great question, lousy answer.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. I mean, but it sounds like it's being worked on all the time. So the new information is coming out, research. If we start at age 65, has there been any research that change, diet, exercise, etc., can influence Alzheimer's and Parkinson? Still works.
Yeah, they're still hope for us. Yes, definitely. For sure. I mean, what's the expression? Best time to grow an oak tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today, kind of thing. Start now. And it's not just these things that influence it. I mean, it influences many other things too, besides the mental diseases. We have some studies ongoing now where we're making people follow the MIND diet once they have Parkinson's, and that's, does that delay the onset of the further progression of the disease kind of thing? Yeah, eat healthy anyway. It's coming. Yep.
And brush your teeth. and get your sleep. All the basics, right? Which is
It's boring, but it's true. But it's through the
right.
microbes.
I can think
Diet and exercise.
my grandfather lived to 105, and other family members didn't. And then I always think about what did he do, and there was a certain consistency that he did that I think was kind of magic, but
Mhm. Although
including
you
getting,
see the 100-year-olds and they have the scotch a day and they've never exercised in their life. They're outliers, and we see that. Once you turn
yes.
100, your microbes get really weird. Yep.
Oh, really?
Yep.
He had some insights that would be interesting. Um, Someone else said, thank you so much. Extremely interesting presentation. Someone, and the last question we have is, can you tell me, possibly the last one, can you tell me where to find information about checkpoint inhibitors and people who it does not work for?
Yeah. Probably there's a site called PubMed, PUBMED on the web. This is a
Yep.
free search access of all the scientific literature. And just go into PubMed in the search box and type checkpoint inhibitors and microbes. You'll get all the scientific studies associated with it. And that's what scientists use to do it. There is nothing commercial yet with respect to checkpoint inhibitors. They know the correlation. There's many companies that are working on combination microbes they can give to people, but they're still in early stages. So right now, there's not a lot you can do. Oh yeah, I see someone's put PubMed up on there. Yeah, just click on that, then type in checkpoint inhibitors and microbiome, and you'll get reviews and things, and you'll be able to read the abstracts and give you the general idea of what's going on there. So it's coming, but unfortunately, we're not here yet. There's no, I could say what screen you do, and then take this mix of bugs to fix you, so you can then go for these checkpoint inhibitors. But it has really changed the treatment of melanomas and things, which is very common cancer that's very hard to treat in many people.
Interesting. Someone has asked, is there a link to the study in Hong Kong? I'm not sure.
I don't have it up here. Again, I just go to PubMed and
Okay.
type long COVID, symbiotic, and Hong Kong or something like that. I'm sure it'll come up right away. It was published, I think, last year. Or if you email me directly, I can send it to you. The company's developing it, but you can't buy it yet, unfortunately. I think some people in Canada have actually tried, can I take this kind of thing? But you could probably do derivatives of it based on probiotics that exist in and prebiotics. Yeah, when I read, I said, why is this on the front page of every newspaper? Because it works so well. And it was a good study, a big study. It
Oh,
was
that's good.
not an N of 10 or something. No, it is a really terrific study. And they characterized the microbiome and stuff. And the data was really overwhelming. So there's hope for long COVID in that sense.
Oh, yes, there's a question. After a course of antibiotics, how might you repair your biome? And
Yeah. So if you have an infection, take antibiotics, your microbes go a bit like this, right? And then they kind of go back to like here, not quite all the way. You take a second course of antibiotics, another infection, they go over to here, and they snap back to here. By the time you get the third course of antibiotics, they just do not go back to normal at all. So you need to think, okay, I'm damaging my microbes. What can I do? And it's all the boring things. Eat diverse amounts of food. Mediterranean diet is a great way of doing it, for example. Can't take prebiotics. You can take probiotics, but the data is, there's actually a study showing that if you take a probiotic full of antibiotics, it actually inhibits the colonization of your normal microbes because the probiotics get in there first. So generally speaking, probiotics are not recommended. I would think, okay, I've hurt my microbes. How can I heal them? And diet, exercise, less stress, go hug a young kid, your grandkid or whatever, and try and get those microbes back. One course, don't worry about it, but it's people that are on long course antibiotics and things are multiple courses, their microbes get really screwed and they're in real trouble.
it's so fascinating. There's a question, does your microbiome need to repair
Mhm.
after chemo and immune therapy? I'm guessing the same way: diet, exercise, less stress.
Thanks for listening. You got it. Yes, it needs to be repaired. Chemo is brutal on the microbiome as well as other things and immune therapy type things. And again, right now, currently, we have no magic pill of, okay, here's 10 microbes you should take that'll fix your microbiome kind of thing. So you nailed it. Diet, exercise, stress, that's how we do it these days. But I would encourage you to do it. It's really good for you to repair your microbiome after it's damaged.
Thank you. You really had me thinking. I have been looking at intergenerational pieces for a while in long-term care, and it's exciting to hear you say that it can even help your microbiomes to be exposed to younger people. So it's like another piece to the puzzle of engagement
Yeah,
with
I
each
think
other.
what we've come to realize, I mean, let's face it, microbes are transmitted between people, right? There's actually a study in some islands in the South Pacific where they figured out who was married to who based on what microbes they had. So I immediately asked,
Wow.
well, who's having
Wow.
affairs? What do they look like, right?
Wow.
But you
Okay,
can
that's
do
a whole
that,
nother
and
conversation.
we know that microbes are transmitted from people to people. There's a few papers out now showing this, that really it's who you hang around with. For example, people that are obese, if you have an obese friend, you have a 50% higher chance of being obese, kind of thing. It's, people with inflammatory bowel disease, their spouse who's not genetic related to you has a much higher chance of getting inflammatory bowel disease. Are you acquiring it from, I didn't talk about, I should have probably talked about, I skipped over in the talk, call it
It's
non-communicable
okay. We'll have
diseases.
to have another conversation because
Yeah,
we're
yeah, yeah.
coming to the end of our time
Okay.
together. Yeah, thank you, Brett, and everyone for attending our webinar. We really appreciate you being here, and I'm excited to learn more, and I'm looking forward to the book. We encourage you to attend other events scheduled for Embrace Aging Month. Please visit our website at OkanaganEmbraceAging.com for all the events and registration. We look forward to growing this event further. We invite you to please take the survey and the evaluation form when it comes to you by email to give us more input. We welcome everybody's feedback and suggestions. And thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today and for you coming to present and getting us all thinking about our
Good.
microbiome. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
All right.
you. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.